The Bible tells us the story of two men who desired a throne. One of those men's desire was to keep a throne. The other man's desire was to steal a throne. And the man caught in the middle of those two men is the man we know as David. The first man that tried to keep a throne was Saul. Saul had lost the kingdom that he had been given, and that is because he continually disobeyed. He did not do what God told him to do through the prophet Samuel over and over and over again, and God said, fine, if that's what you want, you can have it, you lose your kingdom. And Samuel goes on and he anoints David to be king. After that, David was quickly called into the court of Saul because he was given an evil spirit that tormented him, and David came in and played music for Saul to calm that evil spirit. Well, then the time comes with Goliath, and David goes out and he kills Goliath, and that is about the time that Saul took things into his own hands there. Because not long after that, David is back in the court playing music for Saul, and Saul picks up a javelin and tries to nail David to the wall with it. And then if you read the rest of the book of 1 Samuel, you'll find the remaining pursuit of Saul pursuing David, trying to end him over and over and over again. Saul could have stopped, and he could have repented. He could have made the best of the years he had left. But he chose not to. He chose instead to try and keep the throne he'd already lost. Now, in the second instance, David had a son by the name of Absalom. Absalom was the third in line to the kingdom. The first in line, his half-brother Amnon, he raped Absalom's sister Tamar, and for that, Absalom killed Amnon. The second in line, Gilead, we don't know why or where he disappeared to, if he was even caring to have the throne. Absalom, however, wanted the throne. The Bible records his desire for it led him to steal the hearts of the people. He went to the city gate where the people would come through on their way to the King David to ask for his judgment, his justice, to be meted out in various circumstances. And Absalom went there and he sat at the throne or at the city gate and he intercepted the people and he said, oh, here's my judgment. Here's my justice. Oh, this justice I'm giving you is way better justice than you will ever get with my father David. And he steals the hearts of the people, and the people begin coming to him. And for 4 years, Absalom does this, before he journeys to Hebron. And there in Hebron, he is proclaimed king. David desires to avoid great bloodshed, and thus he flees from Jerusalem, which allows Absalom to come in, and Absalom does, and makes his way to Jerusalem, takes up David's residence and palace. Then he has sex with David's concubines, which causes a whole slew of other issues, and eventually pursues David to kill him, and their armies meet. And we know the story that David wins a victory over Absalom. Absalom runs away, and he gets caught because he had long hair. His hair gets caught up in the tree. He's hanging from the tree. Joab comes along and kills him, even though that was against David's wishes. Two men, both desiring a throne, the throne of Israel, that was not theirs to have. One to keep, one to steal. Both caused David immense pain and distress. And now we're not sure when David penned the words of Psalm 4. The great majority of people would place it as having been penned either while he's on the run from Saul or on the run from Absalom. There's a few outliers, but that's the great majority. But he cries out in Psalm 4 and he says these words, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long, O ye sons of men, will you turn my glory to shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still, Selah. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in my heart, more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep. For you, O Lord, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. That's the cry of David in Psalm 4. And so consider first with me the one to whom David cried. The one to whom David cried. He says, hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. If you spend any time in the Psalms, like the psalm we read this morning, the opening cry of David or the other psalm writer is what? That the Lord's ear would be inclined to them, that he would hear them, that he would listen to the cry of their heart and where they are and what they need. In other words, I need God to hear me, and I need to hear from God. There's almost a bit of a panic in this verse, if you will. Almost a fear that, what if God doesn't hear me? What then? David's cry was not to himself or to a figment of his imagination, an idol. He was crying to God, Yahweh. The one who had helped him with the bear, the one who had helped him with the lion, the one who had helped him with Goliath, the one that had strengthened him as he ran from Saul day in and day out, the one on whom he depended for righteousness, because David knew in and of himself, we have the record of David's failings, some of David's failings, pretty terrible things that he did. In and of himself, there was no righteousness, but in God, he could rely on God for righteousness. He could only rely on God for righteousness. Over and over and over again, God provided him relief in the midst of his distress from his enemies. And now in chapter 4, David needs mercy again. In other words, God, you've helped me out of some tight spots before, but oh, do I need you to help me out of this one again. This entire verse is maybe a showcase of how we should live our lives. What should we do? We should continually thank God for having heard us, for having given us mercy. You've relieved me in my distress. But then not just that, to ask again, but God, I need your mercy anew today. I need new mercy for today. In verses 2 through 5, we then see this, the ones about whom David cried. The ones about whom David cried. He says, how long, O you sons of men? What was it that angered Saul? After he killed Goliath, the people sang Saul's thousands and David's 10,000s. What was it that Absalom did to David? He went to the city gate and undermined him and stole the hearts of the people away from their king. How long, he says, will you turn my glory into shame? How long would I imagine that during this time, Absalom wasn't just simply saying, yeah, my dad's justice is not very good. I'm guessing he peppered in a few more things about how bad David was and how evil David was and how his dad did this and did that and he was a terrible person and all these kind of things. I imagine Saul, when chasing David, was telling his men how bad David was and all these terrible things David had done in order to try and steal the throne from Saul and all this. How long would David have to endure the character assassinations? How long would the good that David had done be thrown aside, trampled underfoot? How long would falsehood, lies about David be allowed to continue? I'm reminded a bit of Isaiah 5, verse 20, that says what? Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. It's a lot of what David's enemies did during that time. But there at the end of verse number 2, he says what? Selah. In other words, stop. Pause. Don't ignore what I just asked. Don't flippantly say, how long will all this happen? Don't just don't walk on by it. No, stop and consider what you're doing, Saul, Absalom, whomever else it could have been. Stop and consider what you're doing, whom you're doing to it. Maybe he could ask it this way: is what you're doing justified? Are your words true? Are your actions acceptable? Stop and pause. But then in verse 3, he turns with a definitive word. And he says, but know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. In other words, lest in your fight against me, Saul, Absalom, don't forget God. God knows who is right. Oh, you might claim yourself to be right. You may put yourself before all the people and talk about how bad I am and the bad I've done, which might be valid and true. But don't forget, God knows which one of us is right. Do not think God will turn a blind eye to those who serve him righteously and abandon them. And as if making clear that he himself had sought God and asked whether or not he was right, David says there at the end, the Lord will hear when I call him. In other words, I've sought the Lord, and he's on my side. Albert Barnes summarized it like this. He said, as I am engaged in his service, as I am appointed to accomplish a certain purpose for him, I may confidently believe that he will hear me and will deliver me out of their hands. Is not this always the true ground of encouragement to pray? That if God has a purpose to accomplish by us, he will hear our prayer and save us from danger and deliver us out of the hand of our enemies. And should not this be the main design of our prayers? That God would thus spare us that we may accomplish the work which he has given us to do. He goes on to his enemy and says this, almost again, be angry and sin not. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still, Selah. When he says be angry, it's almost like the instruction in the Bible in that we should be angry at sin. We should be angry at the sin in our lives, but we should not allow that anger to turn into a sinful anger. In the case of Saul or Absalom, be angry. Be angry that your heart has deceived you and led you down this road to where you're pursuing me to try and kill me to the death and all the other slander you've been involved in and all these other things that you've done. No, stop, take a look inside, look at your heart and consider what you're doing. Don't allow that to harden your heart and you pursue me more. But no, be angry that you allowed yourself to be led astray. In other words, consider it, stop, and don't do it again. And that's what he says. Offer, in verse 5, the sacrifices of righteousness, and put your trust in the Lord. Those that sinned in that day, they were to offer a sacrifice to God, and that they might be renewed to righteousness. In other words, when they made a sacrifice in the Old Testament of that sin offering, it was a sign, I have repented. I've realized the error of my way, and what I was doing was wrong and against God and even against others, and I'm asking forgiveness from that thing. I don't want to do that thing. I've turned away from that thing. That's what David's encouragement to them is. Offer a sacrifice, turn away from it. Show evidence that you've turned from your sin. Now, today, of course, we wouldn't make a sacrifice of an animal. Rather, we would say, sacrifice yourself. Put your all on the altar. Don't trust yourself. Stop believing you're enough, that you can find your way to God. No, instead, realize you need a substitute on your behalf. Jesus. The one to make things right between you and God. Put your trust in him and be saved. Now, this time during David being chased by Saul and by David chased by Absalom would have been a time of significant turmoil among that nation. People not knowing who to believe. Do we believe Saul the king and this war he's on to kill one man? Do we believe Absalom, the king's son, who's pursuing his father, trying to kill him? Who are we to believe? They all say we're the right ones, we're righteous. But which one's truly right? That's what verse 6 says. There be many who say, who will show us any good? But then David's plea at the end there is this: Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. In other words, Lord, show them, like a spotlight shining through the dark, show them that I am in the right. This is not a moment of pride of David saying, see, I'm righteous, I'm better than all those guys. No, this is a moment of humility. In other words, God, show them that I'm right, sure, but show that I'm following you, that you are right, that you, the Lord, are right. That's what he desires here. Show all Israel who's dwelling in truth. And then the psalm ends in verses 7 and 8 with the one for whom David cried. It's been connected between here, but first he cried to God, then he cried about his enemies, and now he cries for himself. Not that he hasn't mentioned himself along the way, but he says in verse 7, you have put gladness in my heart, more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep. For you, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Now imagine the two scenes. David, a young man, running from cave to cave to cave to escape the king and all the armies of Israel. Or imagine David as an old man, with a lot of friends at his place, but being chased and running place to place to place to escape from his son who has stolen his kingdom, who has stolen the hearts of the people, and has led these loyal rebels to kill David. And yet in arguably two of the maybe worst times in David's life, he says, I am more glad now than even in the times when we had everything. When the harvests were great and the wine increased and we were living large and living fat and having a blast, I'm more glad now. I have more peace now. It's quite amazing. He says, I will both lie down in peace and sleep. Both being together as one unit. Together at the same time. In other words, when David's head hits the pillow, he says, I am going to lie down in peace, and when sleep takes me, I will sleep peacefully. I will not toss and turn, wondering if I am right. I will not have a restless night, wondering if I've miscalculated this thing. No, I will lie down and rest, knowing God is with me. Albert Barnes again said, this is said in view of his confidence in God, and of his belief that God would preserve him. He had put his trust in him, he had sought his happiness in him, and now he felt assured he had nothing to fear. And at peace with God, he would lie down and compose himself to rest. I can say from personal experience, I have never slept better and felt more safe than when I knew I was exactly where God wanted me to be. Though arguably, some people would look at that from the outside circumstance and say, financially, you're not better off. Maybe emotionally, it doesn't seem like you should be better off. It doesn't seem like it's a spiritually great place where you'd be better off there than somewhere else. All these things could be going on, and yet I could lie down in peace and safety and sleep because I knew I was right where God wanted me to be. We all might desire to say the same thing. I entitled the message, What You Really Need. What you really need. Whether Saul or Absalom, David's plea is that they realize that their true need is not a throne, but rather that they realize their every need is fulfilled in God. Now, obviously, we're not in a circumstance where we are kings or queens or princes or princesses desiring and vying for a throne.
Thank God.
Thankfully, yes. And so that specific thing is not necessarily applicable to us. But when we look at the underlying desire of Saul and Absalom, the throne in and of itself isn't a thing of right or wrong necessarily. It's the desire of the heart to have the thing that, in Saul's case, had been taken away and he wanted to keep. And in Absalom's case was to take something that was not rightfully his to have. That's the heart of pride that leads them to this place. We might say it this way. David's plea is that they realize they will never be able to get and have and achieve enough such that they are fulfilled. You will never be able to get all that you get at this throne. Look at the life of Solomon as a great example of this. To have everything and still nothing. Rather, they must realize only in God will every need be fulfilled. I think it was Jim Carrey, the actor Jim Carrey, who said, my desire and hope is that everyone becomes an actor and such and gets all this money and everything like this and all this fame. That way they will realize it is nothing. It doesn't satisfy. It doesn't help. Oh, it helps a little bit, but it's not the thing. We might say it this way today. You and I need to realize. Maybe you and I need to remember. We will never be able to get and have and achieve enough such that we are fulfilled, but rather only in God will every need be fulfilled. Only in God will we be able to lie down in peace and safety. And so what you really need, first and foremost, of course, is you really need to place your faith in Jesus and trust in the work that he did on the cross, which we'll partake in here in a moment. You need, first and foremost, a right relationship with God the Father. And maybe what you really need is to put your trust in God and trust that he will supply all your need according to his riches and glory. Maybe what you need, and notice in here, David's not necessarily calling out and asking God to end his distress, but he's rather calling out to God to help him in his distress. What we might need is not necessarily an end to the problems we're facing, but rather we need to call out to, O God of my righteousness, as David put it. And in him, in the midst of our distresses and failures and troubles, find in him the peace that passes all understanding. So I'm not accusing you of doing something sinful like Saul or Absalom today, but I would like to steal the sentiment of David and say, stop. Look inside, meditate within yourself, consider what you really need, consider what you're pursuing, consider what you really need, and make adjustment if need be.